And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Tonight is June 2nd at 8:28 p.m. I'm Federico Lyons of State Charge Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode, we have an interview with author Jack Cashill. He is the author of the latest book, Ashli, The Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. And obviously, that book is, named after Ashli Babbitt, but I know that the book contains stories of other women involved in January 6th. So, thank you, Jack, for coming on with us tonight.
Hey, Seth, Federico, thanks for having me. It's my honor.
No, thank you, Jack. Thank you very much. I'm going to start off with just a basic question of our electoral system. Jack, what constitutes the win? In your opinion, what constitutes the winner in a presidential election, the popular vote or the electoral college vote?
Well, let's get back to the basics. It's, of course, the electoral college vote. It was set up that way for a reason, thank God. Our founding fathers were wiser than the people who edit Time Magazine or the New York Times. And what it does is it keeps one hugely populous state with a demented sort of political culture from overwhelming the rest of America. And it worked well in 2016. It would have worked well in 2020 if it had been on the up and up, but it wasn't. It was rigged in any number of ways. And it was, I don't want to get into the details of that, but the people who were following that election had every reason to be upset. And the people who were most observant, who were most conscious of the problem, who were most devoted to protecting the nation, showed up in Washington on January 6th, 2021. And there was no celebrities in her midst, no Madonna's threatening to blow up the White House as she did in 2017. Just about 1 million ordinary citizens of all races, creeds, and colors, and they came unarmed. That's they're going to lead an insurrection. It would have been the first unarmed insurrection in the world's history. And given the fact that they were the most heavily armed people in the world, literally, and in terms of a person-per-person basis, they all left their guns at home because they wanted to do what their president asked them to do, peacefully and patriotically, make their voices heard.
Okay, all right. We can dig a little more on 2016, 2020, and also 2000, because I'm writing my third book on elections, but we can dive in a little more. But Seth, I'll turn it over to you. So if you want to dive into his book.
Yeah, I know January 6th, there's a lot of noise out there on all sides of the political spectrum. And, I guess the question I have for you is how did you investigate this and get the facts and evidence that led to your conclusions? Because there's a lot of narratives out there on both sides, but I rarely hear evidence. So I just want to give you a chance to talk about how your investigation and how you came to your conclusions.
Sure. And by the way, that's an excellent question because I'm basically, and I've done this in all my other books. Not all my other books. Only one story that I break. And that's the story of the Bill Ayers ghosting Barack Obama's book. And what I do otherwise is basically connect the dots. So I'm working off the research that's been done by other people like Julie Kelly and Darren Beatty and Joe Hanneman and Laura Logan. A lot of other people have done the spade work here. And I came in, I decided to see put a human face on this whole tragedy was. And I wanted to start with Ashli Babbitt. As you described her, she was shot and killed in the Capitol on January 6th, the best known of the poor people killed that day. And then when I realized I could not write a book just about her, there's just not enough information, I decided to expand it to a larger group of women who could fill out the spaces of why did these women go to Washington? Why did they end up affecting their lives in major ways. Why is it that two of them never returned home? And then I got the larger story. I let that story tell itself. And I'll give you an example of a kind of a breakthrough I made. And it's a really chilling detail. And maybe the most grotesque bit of cover-up in recent American history. And I stumbled on it. One of the women I profiled, and I profiled a total of 10 women, 8 of them survived that day. One of whom was Sarah Carpenter, a retired NYPD police officer. She just came down on a whim that morning, the morning of January 6th. Went in the Capitol through an open door, like everyone else, almost everyone else, and came out. She got maced a few times, but otherwise unbothered. She didn't hit anyone or break anything. She's driving back to New York that evening, and she calls a friend who lives in Maryland. And she's, it comes up that she's just come from the Capitol. And the friend says, "You were at the Capitol?" And Sarah says, "Yeah." And then the friend freaks out. She says, "You killed a guy. You killed an officer," meaning you in general. "You protesters killed the Capitol police officer with a fire extinguisher." Her husband, the woman's husband, was a retired Capitol police officer. So Sarah presumed that he obviously had links into the department. So this is the night of January 6th. The rumor has already started that a police officer was killed by a protester with a fire extinguisher. On January 7th, through purely organic reasons, having nothing to do with January 6th, Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick dies of a series of strokes. It has nothing to do with the events of January 6th. At the end of the day, we see videos of Sicknick walking around healthy. On January 7th, someone made the conscious decision to basically have Brian Sicknick murdered. I put that in quotes. He's already dead. Someone decided to make him a murder victim. This is a really ghoulish thing to do. On January 8th, in the morning of January 8th, before Sicknick has his autopsy, which occurs later that day, the New York Times releases a report, and I have a shot of the actual print version before they changed it, saying that Brian Sicknick was killed, protesters hit him over the head with a fire extinguisher, and they had this chilling detail that he was rushed out of the Capitol with a big gash and blood flowing from his head. 2 law enforcement officials are their source, right? So what they've already done, and that changed all the reporting on January 6th. Up until that point, it had been treated as like, okay, thing got out of control, boys will be boys, etc. It's like a panty raid at a frat house. I mean, it wasn't any more serious than that. Now, these insurrectionists are murderers. It's a lethal insurrection. Now, typically, in a controversial case, the medical examiner will release the autopsy immediately. In this case, and the limit is 90 days. You have a 90-day window, you have to release it. In this case, they went beyond 90 days without releasing Sicknick's autopsy report and did not release it until Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit forcing it out. Now we're beyond 100 days. So for the first 4 months after January 6th, the nation was led to believe that these protesters, these violent, lethal, racist, white nationalist, MAGA protesters, killed a police officer with a fire extinguisher. And then when the story proves not to be true, they make believe it didn't happen. I mean, they just blew it off as though that did not change anything. And then to make it even more ghoulish, in the 100 days or so after the protest at the Capitol, 4 police officers, Capitol police officers, males, commit suicide. And so what they do is they presume that this had something to do with January 6th, and they add it to the death count. So now you'll have Biden, you'll have Merrick Garland, et cetera. You have the judges in these various trials, telling the jurors that the Capitol, that five police officers were killed as a result of January 6th. And the jurors are incorporating that into their decision making. It is, and then to make it make this even more blasphemous, they take the ashes of Brian Sicknick, put it in the rotunda of the Capitol, and then have a major ceremony there. The last person so honored was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Then they buried the ashes in Arlington. This is a civic blasphemy of the highest order. I don't know of a lie that's been told in the Trump era that was more grotesque than that one.
Seth?
Hello?
Yeah. And to my question about your investigations, did you speak to a lot of family members for the women and that profile?
Good question. I was very fortunate, and the 8 living women, and I just chose them almost at random. All 8 agreed to cooperate, so I talked to all of them. In some cases, I talked to them, and when they're in prison, I talk to them like through the mail or, in brief 15-minute conversations. I talked to their husbands also. I talked to Ashli Babbitt's mother. She was critical. I wouldn't have done the project if she hadn't agreed to cooperate. The one family I did not talk to was Roseanne Boylan's family. Roseanne was the other woman who was killed on January 6th. And oddly, the reason I didn't feel the need to talk to Boylan's family is because they had stopped talking to the media after working with MSNBC to try to get the truth out of how their daughter died. And they got disgusted with MSNBC. But in the interim, MSNBC did some very good work they did a 5-part podcast on Roseanne Boylan's death. And most people, even the people who tracked January 6th, don't know who Roseanne Boylan is. And the House Committee, like 800-page report, they don't even mention her in the footnotes. I mean, she gets no mention at all. And she was killed as a direct result of a police action. There was no DOJ investigation, no crime scene tape, no eyewitnesses talked to. She just was killed, and let's move on. MoveOn.org.
Yeah, and her death is one of, back to my original question about there being so much noise out there. I looked up her case and her death, and I saw headlines about her being killed, being trampled by a crowd, and then I see headlines of a medical examiner saying she died of acute amphetamine intoxication. And so that's
right.
There's so many stories out there. It's just so hard to piece together what actually happened in her case or any other case concerning January 6th.
For the general public, you're right, but I spent a lot of time on this one. I wanted to get it right. And that meant, making sure I knew where it happened, how it happened, talking to the eyewitnesses, reviewing the video. There's plenty of video evidence to what happened. But basically, here's the story this is the true story of really, this one you can take to the bank. In fact, everything in my book you can take to the bank. I don't make mistakes. And I don't BS for the sake of BSing. My father was a cop, so I have no interest in embarrassing police officers. The Roseanne, and from the larger perspective, by the time Roseanne Boylan got to the Capitol, it had been open for 2 hours. There were multiple open doors. People had been wandering in and out. Ashli Babbitt had been shot and killed about an hour and a half earlier. There must have been a half a dozen open doors and probably that many open windows. And yet there was this tunnel entrance on the west side of the Capitol that the police guarded as though they were the Alamo. I mean, they were just relentless in making sure no one came in that entrance. I'm not sure I know why. But Roseanne got caught up in a scrum in front of that entrance. She was relatively small. She was overweight. She was with our friend, a male. They got separated in the crowd. Once you get caught, especially for a woman who isn't big enough to fight her way out of that crowd, even men, you get caught in a scrum like that, you go where the crowd goes. You really lose control over it. And the crowd was they were being pushed towards the tunnel entrance from behind. And her friend, Justin, he believes that the people pushing were not allies. He believes that they were, in part at least, provocateurs. But in any case, she gets pushed into the tunnel entrance, and then the police decide to make a counter charge. So they first start by spraying the crowd with, I believe it was OC gas, which sort of sucks the oxygen out of the room, and then people start feeling faint and they're collapsing in the midst of that crowd. And then the police make a charge, and they push the whole crowd down these temporary steps that are set up for the inauguration. Roseanne gets caught at the bottom of the pile. And the fellow next to her is a black conservative named Philip Anderson, who's been very active in trying to get the truth out. They're both at the bottom of the pile. Roseanne reaches out and grabs his hand. She's obviously in distress. Anderson is yelling, "Help!" Anderson thinks he's going to die just from suffocation. Finally, some people pull the crowd off while Anderson's still alive. He's barely alive. He's totally limp and breathless. When they pull Roseanne out, she may already be dead. She's certainly dying. So for a moment, she lies at the mouth of the tunnel, at which point, and this is the most brutal video captured from the whole event, a black female police officer picks up a branch that was lying there, like about 4 feet long, and starts beating Roseanne over the head with this branch. Roseanne is lying there limp. She may be dead. If she's not dead, she's on the way to dying. And she hits her so hard 3 consecutive times that the branch breaks in half and flies out of Lila Morris's hand. This is all captured on video. Plenty of eyewitnesses. The DOJ never investigated it. Morris got in no trouble for doing it. In fact, she went to the Super Bowl a month later as a guest of the NFL. She was a hero. Now, at that time, the video had not come out. And then here's where it gets dark again, and the medical examiner is at the center of it again. Immediately after this happens, a few days after, when the New York Times first mentions Roseanne's name, they say she was trampled. And that was the story for about 80 days. She was trampled to death. And then finally, at the end of the 90-day window, the medical examiner releases its report, and they say amphetamine intoxication. Roseanne took Adderall. She had ADD. And her family was horrified, and they were liberals, by the way. And they were outspoken liberals. They wanted Trump deposed from the White House with the 25th Amendment, etc. They were horrified. They said, this is the last thing we wanted to see from Roseanne, because Roseanne had a drug habit earlier, and she quit her drug habit, and now she's being and I suspect the medical examiner knew that and was playing off that when they came up with this bogus diagnosis. So in the autopsy report, there's no mention of the crowd, no mention of the gas, no mention of the trampling, no mention of the beating. None of that is in there. And when you're doing an autopsy report, you are expected to include all the environmental factors that might have induced the death. They're not there at all. And MSNBC is investigating this, and they're getting shocked by what they're finding, because they're getting stonewalled at every turn. When they go to the medical examiner, they say, what's all this about? And they talk to the police, stonewall. Medical examiner, stonewall. No one will talk to even MSNBC. And then Roseanne's family gets, exasperated with MSNBC, because all that MSNBC really wanted to talk about was QAnon and Trump. And they wanted to find out how their sister or their daughter died. And they finally started talking to the Gateway pundit, the Boylan family. And then MSNBC gets upset with them for talking to Gateway pundit, and the investigation dies. But what I just told you there is what is known right now about her death, and it is accurate, and it is there's really no need to speculate. It was all captured on video. I've seen the video multiple times.
I'm sorry to interject. Now, thank you for that great explanation of not only Ashli Babbitt, but the other young lady that lost her life. I know it was an unfortunate incident, what happened there. And the reason why it happened was because the majority of Americans believed that the election was stolen and Stop the Steal. And I want to bring a comparison. I want to bring a comparison to another similar election where the other side claimed that their election was stolen, and that was 2000, where you have and I lived through it because I'm from Florida and all that. So
right.
I want to see where the comparison, because how I see it is that the Democrats and the Gore team were shouting, "Count the votes! It's stolen!" Blah blah blah, and they were asking Florida to look into Texas model of ballots and all that. And then when we flash forward to 2020, they were doing the same thing, asking Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to look into a Texas model. And I asked many of my liberal friends, where was the proof that the election was stolen? I mean, and they couldn't give me an answer. And then I asked my conservative friends, where was the proof that the election was stolen? So I want to ask you, the liberals did not want to answer me, and they just brushed me off because they thought Gore was the winner. But Gore lost the popular vote. Gore won the popular vote and lost the electoral vote of Florida, and that's what gave the win to George W. Bush. Here in 2020, Trump lost the electoral vote and the popular vote. So the liberals couldn't tell me where was the election stolen, and I want to know if you can, outshine the liberals and tell me where was the election stolen in 2020.
Yeah, I would say this is that, Federico, that's a good question. It's a fair question. And the problem is that what makes it hard to answer specifically is that there was not one grand master plan that was executed by like some James Bond villain to change all the electoral votes. And that didn't happen. What you had, though, is the Democrats have had a monopoly on what I would call ballot harvesting for the last 150 years, ever since Boris Sweet and Tammany Hall. Their strategy was simply to exploit a given immigrant group. They started with the Irish, and then send their people out on election day, or at that time it wasn't a 2-week or 4-week interval, and then make sure that all the votes, that all the voters, that all the citizens and non-citizens had a ballot, and that ballot was filled out and that it was delivered to the precinct captains. That's what they did in Chicago. They stole the 1960 election. The Democrats did. They were good at it. What they did in 2020 is they went into overdrive this time because they had all these mail-in ballots. And the people delivering the mail, 60 million votes, had been told by their union leaders that a Trump victory would mean the end of their union, the end of the post office as they knew it, the end of their jobs. And then we trusted them with 60 million votes. If anyone tried to report on this, as, for instance, Project Veritas did, they would get shut down and denied. And the Democrats were very good at accusing anyone who wanted the votes to be counted in any kind of legitimate way as racist. And they intimidated the more weaker-kneed Republicans into just nearly yielding, most of whom didn't want Trump in anyhow, so it didn't much matter to them as long as they kept their jobs. That was on the one level. I would say, and that would, you could write a book on that, on how that was done. We know that at least, a half a dozen states ignored the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, and changed their voting regulations. The Constitution is very specific on only a state legislator can set the time and place. We had medical officials and courts deciding to expand that without even going to the legislator. That should have made it invalid right there. That is clearly a constitutional violation. Here's the thing that really got to people, though, and I think angered them. We had seen media rigging all along. Even people with like 300 followers on Facebook knew that their posts were being suppressed. I did. I mean, it wasn't even a secret. They were doing it openly. We did not know at the time that they were working directly with the FBI to do that, but we suspected it. That was a side issue until about 3 weeks before the election, and we all remember this very specifically, when the Hunter Biden laptop story broke. And I remember, I can tell you, flying across country that day, and it was very exciting. And then I said, boy, this is a game changer. And then I had heard by the day was over that Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, had shut it down. Not only that, they had blocked New York Post. That's how far they went. No one was allowed to tweet this or to send it on, to share it or whatever. And I said, we have two scandals here. One is the Hunter Biden laptop scandal of, paying off the big guy 10% to do all these corrupt foreign deals. But even the bigger scandal is the social media scandal. Now, I knew this. The people who showed up in Washington knew this. They knew that this whole rigging process was taking place. And then it gets worse. And here's the thing that I think justified everyone being in Washington, even if they knew nothing more than this, is that the current Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, organized this recruitment of 51 high-ranking intelligence officials, including former CIA heads, to swear that the Hunter Biden laptop was a hack and dump Russian operation. And then they fed this to Joe Biden, because this happened just before the final debate. And so at the final debate, Trump is up there talking about, the laptop, about the collusion with all these evil, corrupt businesses and various foreign entities, the 10% of the big guy, all this. And then Biden jumps back and says, this is all crap. Just you and Rudy Giuliani believe. Have 50 high-ranking intelligence officials, respected people from both parties, blah, 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 have testified that this is a Russian operation. End of story. That's where the election was lost, at that moment. And it was an inside job of epic proportion. There was, aided and abetted by the media. Now, the people on the Hunter Biden side, not the Hunter Biden, the Biden camp, the voters who voted for Biden, didn't know this. They were sufficiently shut out of it. And in surveys afterwards, the most conservative estimate I saw is that it would have changed the minds of 4% of Biden voters. I've seen surveys that set up as 15, I don't buy that. But 4% of Biden voters would have fallen away if they knew about the laptop, and they weren't allowed to know. That is rigging at the deepest and highest level. To me, that is more offensive than even, the traditional vote stealing done by, Democrats that they've been doing for years. So that is what ignited these people and inspired them to come to Washington. I asked all the women, why did you come? And that was a very big part of it. Meanwhile, the people who were sitting at home watching this and just, oh my gosh, look at those awful people, don't even know why they went. One other issue that I found that really surprised me is that of all the women I talked to or I could find that information on, this was 9 women, everyone but Roseanne Boylan, they were all, every one of them, COVID dissidents from day one. They reacted negatively to the lockdowns, to the forced vaccinations, all that sort of stuff. And they were outspoken about it. At least one or two of them had been arrested for protesting the lockdown. Every single one of them. I didn't expect that to find that at all. So the distrust, and they could also see then how the lockdowns and COVID were used to loosen up the voting regulations. And you had the Zuckerbucks and all that stuff. The people on the right, the people who went to Washington, even though they were ordinary people, were paying far more attention to the way the world turned than were the people sitting back home, sitting even in Congress on the Democratic side. They saw all this coming, and what are they going to do? They're sitting at home and say, "Oh well, we'll get it back in 4 more years," and no more reason to believe that the election in 2024 would be any more fair if they didn't stand up and protest. And that's why they came.
Okay, thanks. No, that's interesting analysis of the Stop the Steal scenario and theory. Seth, I know you wanted to bring up a question on the treatment of January 6th prisoners on and their habeas corpus proceedings. I know we talked about it before the show, but do you have that question handy or something around there?
Yeah, and that's kind of what you just left off with, Jack, on the COVID stuff. And, I'll be honest, that COVID and lockdowns, right from the beginning, I was opposed to everything that was done by the government. And one of the things that you wrote in your book, I had a chance to read some of it last night, and one of the things, the lines you had was the treatment of the J6ers is the greatest mass injustice against American citizens since Japanese internment. To me, I think the greatest injustice against American citizens in my lifetime was locking us down, calling us non-essential over an alleged cold virus. And I guess the question I have is, and this is kind of the thing that's kind of strange with that these women were, COVID dissidents and they were opposed to lockdowns, but how much did they give Donald Trump the blame? Because I think everybody in Washington, D.C., every governor, I think Trump, I think Biden continued it. I think they're all guilty of crimes against the American people. And so it's strange to see this adherence to Donald Trump when he is the one who signed the executive order that led to lockdowns.
Yeah, and they recognize that, and they're not happy about that. The one decision Trump made that, in a sense, saved America to a large degree, and that Biden would not have made, and that is he quickly delegated the authority to the states to make their own rules. And so what emerged, and since I go to Florida all the time, I was going to Florida. My grandchildren live there. I go 6-8 times a year. It was like going to America, So, and the red states thrived. The effective lockdowns in places like Florida, and I live in Missouri, was fine, Kansas, etc. But in the blue states were just fascist hellholes. Ashli Babbitt came from California, which is why one reason she was so upset. And California rules were comical. They're so ridiculous. I mean, they're so bad. But Trump deserves some of the blame. But at the same time, if had he said no lockdown, there's a good chance they would have pulled the 25th Amendment on him and gotten him out of office. And then he was, a proponent of hydroxychloroquine, and he was mocked for that. The pressure that the media brought to bear, even on Republicans, was formidable. And I can tell you this, because my experience, Federico, is like your own. I remember when Kansas City, where I live, went into the lockdown, I went on Facebook, and Facebook is good for local communication. And I said, listen, I'm willing to be the public face of this protest. We should be out tomorrow on the public square in the thousands, right? We should tell them this, we will not stand for this. This was like March 15th or whatever the date was. And when I got back, even from my conservative friends, was, Jack, are you sure? Right? Early on, there wasn't much support for those of us who were protesting. I know that for a fact. And some of my friends are still kind of embarrassed about their response. They weren't hostile. Some of them were. But most of them were just like, oh, Jack, still a little early. Maybe we ought to be cautious. Well, I've been following the numbers out of Italy, off these cruise ships, et cetera. I knew how essentially non-dangerous it was for healthy people, and it made no sense. But these women were great. I mean, independently, they came to these conclusions. It wasn't like part of a mass movement. They were following independent news sources and making decisions. In fact, one of the women I profiled, she's an outlier in terms of education, is Dr. Simone Gold, who was the founder of America's Frontline Doctors, who went to Washington to give a speech on medical freedom, ended up being swept inside the Capitol, and goes to prison. So you never know.
So, just one last question to fast track now from what happened in 2020 and January 6, 2021, and now entering 2024 election, and now seeing. I just texted Seth that Mexico is about to elect the first female president, and here we have two white generation individuals running for president. I don't know if we'll ever see a female president in our lifetime or in my lifetime. I don't know. But with the Trump verdict and Trump and Biden being the presumptive nominees of a two-party system that I kind of loathe, because even in 1992 I was a Ross Perot fan, and I kind of identify more with Ross Perot than both Republican or Democrats. But now that we're only seeing two again, and then we have RFK Jr. that I, quite frankly, do not care of. I prefer his uncle more because his uncle passed a second largest tax cut in U.S. history, not his foreign policy. But, what do you see, even with the Trump verdict that came guilty of all 34 counts, and do you see that? Do you see the Electoral College will give Trump that win in 2024, or will it give it to Biden for another 4 years? So what is your prediction in 2024?
Federico, bear with me, but I tend to be an optimist. When Trump declared himself a political prisoner, my response was, yes, you are. Now let's talk about the 1,450 other political prisoners that have been dragged through this process without any but a handful of Congress people saying boo about. That was very disheartening, not only to me, but to the people in prison. Up until the Mar-a-Lago raid, I was a Ron DeSantis booster. Personally, I would have preferred DeSantis as the candidate. Once I saw the lawfare unleashed on the president, unprecedented attack on these bizarre lawsuits, I said, no, we all got to get behind Trump now. And I think with the conviction, I think that momentum is going to be stronger, that we will all get behind Trump. Here's what we know, is that the enthusiasm for Donald Trump, even if people don't like him particularly, is hugely higher than is for Joe Biden. The Republicans will turn out on November 5th. The Democrats will have to do a whole lot of shenanigans to get by. What happened in 2016 is they didn't think they needed to. They coasted. So they didn't get out there, vote harvesters, they're granny farmers. They presume they just win without having to cheat. They cheat every year. They cheat every year. They've been cheating every year since 1850. And I think in Florida in 2000, they were upset that they didn't cheat enough. They got lazy. And so this time, again, I think what will happen is that I'm going to be an optimist in that, barring the unforeseen, let's face it, the unforeseen could happen tomorrow, that if it's Trump versus Biden, Trump is going to win. And there's not going to be much the Democrats can do to stop it, short of something really macabre and grotesque. But otherwise, I think Trump wins. So I'll keep that in my mind as I go to bed tonight, but tomorrow I may have to reevaluate.
Okay. Like I said earlier, I don't see. Because I'm a studier of the American Republic of Sovereign States, and I don't see it as I don't want a big federal government, because either with Trump or Biden or his past presidents have always increased the federal government. So I've reluctantly been abstaining in federal elections for president, but that's just for me. But Seth, you have any last questions for Jack on anything on 2024 or before?
Yeah, I like Federico said, I'm kind of a political agnostic right now, in that I think, and this is the kind of way I view the Trump trials, as this big distraction while they're working on getting a central bank digital currency. Our debt is out of control. We've got wars going on around the world that, there's such an effort to get America involved in every foreign conflict. The question is, how do we wake up the American people to start changing things? I think locally is where things start. And do you? I know this book is about January 6th, and you are a Trump supporter, but do you think that I believe we need to have more focus on local elections and getting things done locally, and the people rising up and cleaning up their cities, their towns, and stuff? Do you see a need for focusing locally?
Yeah, absolutely. And Florida is a good example of how you can get things done. And I think the election in 2018 in Florida was probably at least as important as the election in 2016 in Washington. But that said, there's an old saying, and I don't mean to insult anyone or your audience, whoever, but in times of crisis, the lower circles of hell are reserved for people who insist on their neutrality. What we're voting on this time isn't any policy. What we're voting on is saving the republic. 4 more years of what we've seen now, with the abuses we've seen in these last 4 years, where you're having random citizens locked up for who knows what, where you have courts in New York and in Georgia and Washington just deciding to have tailoring crimes, inventing crimes. You have bespoke crimes designed to ensnare individuals. In this case, not just Donald Trump, but the other people who've been convicted, the attorneys and anyone who's associated with Trump. We're at the verge of losing our freedoms. And that happens. If Biden wins again, all talk of any kind of national policy that might please someone of your political persuasion, and I'm not far off, we're in the same ballpark, is moot, because it's not going to happen. The opposite's going to happen. There'll be more wars. There'll be more debt. There'll be more foreign entanglements. There'll be more regulations. There'll be less freedom. That's the consequence of a Joe Biden victory. And I voted for Trump in 2020, 2016, because he wasn't Hillary Clinton. I vote for him in 2024 because he's not Joe Biden. But this time I'll do it with a little more confidence, because he, for 4 years, this is 3.5 years, he was a pretty good president by recent standards. It'd be nice if we had a president who really cared about the debt, who really cared about states' rights. That's not going to happen in 2024, but it sets up the possibility that it could happen in 2028.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Seth said, that to focus locally, local state elections. But unfortunately, with how the Constitution is drafted now, with the 16th and 17th Amendments, and I wrote my second book on that. We're now seeing it. With that terrible tragedy up in Baltimore with the Francis Scott Key Bridge. They're gonna send federal funds to that, and they're probably gonna rename it to the Agnew-Sarbanes Bridge and rename it. That's the thing is that we need to focus on how to stop the bleeding, and I made it my, and that's why I'm kind of proud of my second book to bringing an end to the 16th and 17th Amendments, because those are the amendments that are bleeding this country dry. And I don't know if Trump will help us. I know Biden hasn't helped us, or even before with Bush and Obama and Clinton and all those. I mean, even Clinton with the controlled Congress kind of helped a little bit, but it's sad. That's where we are. So that's why I'm just to give a little personal note, I'm abstaining, because I don't see even with Trump or Biden, they're just going to increase the size of the federal government on other issues, either in defense or social on the Democrat side, or defense on the Republican side. So, but that's where I see it, I think we need to really stop the bleeding and repeal that amendment.
Well, you're right about the 16th and 17th, and that whole decade, right, from 2010 to 2020, if we could take that away, we'd be a much better country, right? We'd have only men voting, for starters.
Yeah,
but it's interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
What's one interesting thing about the was it the 18th Amendment where they banned alcohol?
Yeah, the 18th Amendment, yes.
Yeah. And, it's odd how those amendments work together, because once they instituted the IRS, another one of those amendments from that decade, they were going to lose the excise tax, right? The alcohol that was being imported. And that is why they had that institute, the various constituencies that had to be pleased, including the prohibitionists, the females, and the big government people. So they bargained among themselves, and we get rid of the IRS. Now that compensates for the lack of an excise tax on alcohol. And then, we give the women a vote so that we could get all these amendments passed in the future. But the one good thing is, at that time, America was still capable of doing things constitutionally and then changing their minds, amending them when they realized they had made a mistake. So they repealed the 18th. I think it's the only amendment to be repealed. And we don't do that anymore. We should have had a constitutional amendment for Social Security or for Medicare. We didn't. And so we've gotten so far off that track.
Yeah.
And Trump is not the guy who's going to reverse that, but he'll at least keep the country in play for future people who might do that. So I would strongly encourage your audience to vote for Trump this time. Hold your noses, vote for Trump, because otherwise you're never going to have a chance if the Democrats win.
Yeah, well, let's hope you're right that Trump will lead the way to a little more constitutional in American Republic. I don't see it, but I'm gonna hold my nose and I'm gonna take your word for it, and we'll go from there. But Jack, it's been a pleasure having you on. If you want to share last words on where to find your book and any other notes, sure. Feel free to say it.
Yeah, my book is called Ashli, The Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. The best place to buy it is actually on Amazon, because that's the place where publishers keep score now. So I hate the Amazon. I buy my books from BarnesandNoble.com, and people can buy them there too as well. Or they can go to, I don't know if Barnes and Noble will have it in stock, but they certainly have it. They could order it if they don't. And they could. My website is Cashill.com. CASHILL.com. And gents, I really appreciate you having me on. Great conversation. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, sure. No, we'll reach out. I'll send you a link to this show. And feel free to, if you ever want to come back, and we'll be glad to put you on. Thank you again, and have yourself a great evening.
Hey, Seth, Federico, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.